Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the sounds of gunfire ring out as members of Sudan's feared old guard clash with the security services backing the new transitional government. Former National Intelligence and Security Service officers have been protesting over the amount of severance pay they've received after being disbanded. Also, Turkey warns Libya's General Khalifa Haftar that there will be consequences if he keeps up an assault of the internationally recognized government in Tripoli. And as thousands of people take to the streets in Tunis to celebrate the 9th anniversary of the country's revolution, we take a look at some of the citizens still setting themselves on fire in despair. But first, in Sudan, the sound of gunfire rang out around Khartoum and airspace was closed for several hours on Monday as ex-security agents clashed with soldiers loyal to the new transitional government. Unrest erupted across the country as armed former members of the National Intelligence and Security Service took to the streets in protest over their severance packages. The NISS was a feared instrument for the suppression of dissent under former leader Omar al-Bashir. Now, its restructuring was a key demand of protest leaders who forced Bashir out last April. Authorities have accused a former intelligence chief and member of Bashir's old ruling party of being behind the unrest. Naba Mohideen tells us more.
Loud shooting is still here in Khartoum in different neighborhoods like Riyadh, Kafuri, and other places in central Khartoum. But military troops are securing the sensitive locations like bridges, army headquarters, main roads, and national TV and broadcast. And also surrounding the buildings of the security forces that refuse to hand over the buildings to make sure that there is no direct clashes between the security and the military and different troops like RSF and also the civilians not to get attacked. So right now it's a bit calm, but from time to time there is gun fire here loudly till a political or security solution into the situation. The new transitional government decided to restructure the National Investigation and Security Service and to join the paramilitary troops of the National Security Service. They told them to hand over the buildings. They agreed to hand it over, but when it came to the financial compensation, they refused to hand over the buildings, and they said they need a bigger compensation in order to hand it over. Then they blocked the streets and they shoot gunfire in the air, and they are protesting inside the buildings.
How do you see this affecting the country's transition going forward?
Actually, observers and citizens say it's really a worrying issue if it's not contained or resolved, as these troops are so big. Thousands of troops are located and based in Khartoum. Their headquarters in the heart of Khartoum, which is very close to the army headquarters and very, very sensitive areas and locations. Especially, it's very worrying, especially that Sudan has already made huge efforts in order to sustain peace and to make peace agreements all over the country. So it's a new issue, but also worrying, and it should have an end very soon.
Naba Mohideen there speaking to me a little earlier on. Well, in other news, Turkey's vowed to teach Libyan strongman Khalifa Haftar a lesson if he keeps up attacks on the internationally recognized government based there. Haftar left Moscow on Tuesday without signing a ceasefire aimed at ending 9 months of fighting around the Libyan capital. Turkey and Russia have been trying to mediate peace between the warring sides. Next, it's Germany's turn. It's invited the adversaries to Berlin for negotiations this Sunday. Peter O'Brien has more.
It didn't quite go as planned, and the Turkish president is not happy. After 7 hours of negotiations to end fighting in Libya, General Khalifa Haftar left Moscow without signing a truce. President Erdogan has threatened to retaliate if Haftar continues attacking Libya's UN-recognized government.
In the event that attacks against the country's legitimate government and our Libyan brothers continue, we will not refrain from giving Haftar the lesson he deserves.
The agreement was only signed by Fayez al-Sarraj, head of the Tripoli-based government, and the two sides never met face-to-face. Russia's defense ministry said Haftar has asked for more time to consider the deal and said a shaky ceasefire established at the weekend would continue.
We will continue our work on this track. So far, there has been no definitive outcome.
The effort to stop Haftar's campaign to conquer the Libyan capital, ongoing for 9 months, is the latest attempt to stabilize the country in turmoil since Muammar Gaddafi was toppled in 2011. Turkey and Russia's diplomatic initiative came despite them apparently backing opposing sides. Earlier this month, Turkey began deploying troops to support the Tripoli-based government, while Moscow has been accused of backing pro-Haftar forces using military contractors. Efforts to bring an end to the civil war continue on Sunday at a summit in Berlin.
A teachers' union in Kenya is threatening to pull its member out from around Kamunte in Garissa County if the government doesn't ramp up security there. Members are feeling particularly unsafe as it appears that they're being increasingly targeted by extremist elements. On Monday, 3 teachers were shot dead in Kamunte. No one has yet claimed responsibility for that attack. Thousands of Tunisians marched in Tunis on Tuesday to mark the 9th anniversary since the revolution that sparked the country's relatively successful transition to democracy. However, the celebration took place against a tense political backdrop, and many Tunisians have been disappointed with the toll that high unemployment and rising inflation have taken on their hopes. The revolution itself began when a street seller named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire in protest over state abuse and neglect. Our correspondents in Tunis say that he was not the last to do so. Take a look.
Last November, 30-year-old Abdul Wahab Hablani set himself on fire in this field. His neighbor, Hamouda, says it was an act of desperation after Abdul Wahab had gone 2 years without any payments from the state work program he relied on.
He'd come on foot from Jelma to this field, which is 4 kilometers from the city, and he set himself on fire. Over there you had women picking olives who tried to help him. But he was already too burned. Unfortunately, today, any young person who's in despair could resort to this method to make their voice heard by the government.
Not long after, another man tried to set himself on fire before locals talked him down. Since Mohamed Bouazizi triggered the 2011 Tunisian revolution by burning himself alive in Sidi Bouzid, self-immolations have continued. They often go unreported as the media don't want to encourage copycats. The act is one of protest, often by those dealing with extreme poverty. Abdul Wahab's parents say they struggle to get by.
Look, come and see the kitchen.
All of this, the gas, the fridge, it's neighbours who gave them to us.
The average youth unemployment rate and the poverty rate are both at around 30% in Jelma. Local authorities say they're doing what they can.
As people in charge, we are trying to deal with this situation. In the case of Abdel Wahab Hablani, we went to see him and his family before he committed suicide. There were 6 other young people in his case. We have now contacted social services to write up a report.
Anguished Tunisians are still self-immolating, yet there are no official figures on the phenomenon. As recently as the 9th of January, a street vendor set himself on fire in the city of Nebel.
Well, heroin use across Africa is regrettably on the rise. The drug's often smuggled into Europe from Afghanistan through East Africa. In Burundi, one NGO is trying to help local addicts quit. Nicolas Chamat tells us more.
Most heroin users are in the Northern Hemisphere, according to the UN, but the drug is also present in Africa, like here in Burundi. In this area of Bujumbura, a young heroin addict told us his story.
I had friends who took heroin. I tried some. Now I'm in the same situation as them. I tried to stop, but I only lasted a month. When I don't have heroin, I have headaches, diarrhea, I vomit, and I have stomach aches.
One local NGO is encouraging young Burundians to quit heroin. It offers AIDS screening tests and psychological help. Its founder stopped using heroin several years ago.
I couldn't stand the suffering. I couldn't stand having to vomit. When you use drugs, you withdraw into yourself. You think you can never go back to your previous self, but it's possible.
The UN says that in the last 20 years, the consumption of heroin has increased in Africa faster than anywhere else in the world. The drug is produced in Afghanistan and traditionally reached Europe via the Balkans. But now, increasingly, the EU says it arrives in Europe after transiting via East Africa.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.